streams.
Okay, so we are live, and I am here with comrade Youri Smouter. So maybe firstly, could you present yourself? Who are you? What are you doing? What is your political view? I know you from the Barricade channel because every month you make conversation with Boyan and Maria. You give a thumbs up, a thumb down. So I know you, but could you say more about you?
Well, first of all, Michael, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real honor to be on your program, especially because, as you mentioned, we have some what Facebook calls mutual friends. We have some mutual friends and comrades: Mogojata, Kubacheska, Figats, Dr. Maria Chernats, and Boyan Stanislavski. So it's a real honor to be on your program and following the lineup of them, as well as other wonderful guests you've had, like like Dr. Luna Oy and so forth. So it's a real honor to be on your program. And yes, my name is Youri Smouter. I'm the host of 1+1, which you can find on YouTube and
In
should be
description, in description, I make a link to your channel.
perfect,
So,
perfect. And yeah, in 1+1, I describe it as a current affairs history program because I try to do a lot of current affairs, but a lot of times I think the best conversations are usually the ones because I'm a history buff and I find that the best conversations is when I have a guest on who will give me a who will give me and the audience a crash course in the history of Lebanon, the history of Ireland, the history of New Zealand, history of certain aspects of of Canada, like Canada's long imperial history and stuff like that. So it's a current affairs topical so it's a current affairs topical history program, and I tend to focus a lot on Canadian topics and but even Eastern European affairs and Eastern European history. So that's and with that I've had as I mentioned, some of the guests that you've had on your program have also been on my program, like Bogozhatsa, Kubacheska Figat, Dr. Maria Chernats, Boyan Stanislavski, all from the Barricade, and then also try to do have a playlist of all on topics on Latin American affairs because I cover that a lot. Queer liberation, the plight of the Black diaspora, and Black people in the U.S., Britain, Canada, and whatnot. And yes, and in my politics, I would describe myself definitely, obviously, to the left. And but as I'm getting older, I've noticed I'm sort of going more and more and more to the sort of like far left and whatnot. And yeah, and then 1+1, the tagline is it's your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting, and yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell, and the program in a nutshell.
okay, so you said that you like to make conversation about history, about crash course of some countries. So I will use it to ask some question about Canada.
Perfect.
Uh, because it's there is two reasons why I would like ask about Canada. Firstly, because it's very far, and this is something. It is like terra incognita. It's don't
Yes.
know a lot. I knew more about United States, but about Canada, it's a mystery for me. And also there is another subject. I started to writing book about the Yellow West movement, and I am interested about similar movement in the world, in the history. some of this movement is the truck drivers convoy, which, in my opinion, have very similar some things with Yellow West movement. But it's better to ask you, what do you think about this movement? In your opinion, it is leftist movement, fascist movement, or what can you say about this?
About the I assume you're probably talking about the Freedom Convoy.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Very good question, and yes, and yeah, I'd be happy to explain. So basically, yes, as you know, there's lots of vast income inequality throughout much of the world, and Canada is really no exception. And Canada often gets this image, which is sort of a half true, but it's a little bit over exaggerated, that Canada is the nicer, cuddlier, socially liberal and socialist version of the United States. And and there is a little bit of truth to that, in that Canada does have a quasi single payer healthcare system, and that there are unions there that do have slightly more collective bargaining rights than the ones in the United States, but that's really damning with faint praise. But one of the biggest myths about Canada is that it's a force for good in the world. Is that what you'll often hear? So if Canada is involved in NATO missions, if Canada is involved in UN peacekeeping missions, Canada does the good aspects of it. They're the good cop to the bad cop of America and Britain. But that's completely false. Canada, in fact, like the United States, like Australia, like New Zealand, for that matter, was founded as a settler colonial society, which has dispossessed, brutally suppresses and marginalizes its indigenous population. So talking about the Freedom Convoy and so forth, Canada, like I said, it's a place which also grapples with lots of income inequality and there's a little bit of regional dynamics to it. So for example, two of the most popular places for people to live in Canada, for people to visit Canada and whatnot, is Ontario, which I hope I'm not getting my geography wrong, but which is sort of in the east, along with Quebec. And Quebec is a province in Canada. It's where the majority of Canada is English speaking, but then you have this one unique province called Quebec, which is French speaking, which keeps Canada on its toes. And if we analyze the politics of the Freedom Convoy, there's a feeling in Canada amongst the Western provinces, which is Alberta, which is mainly Alberta and Saskatchewan, that too much focus, in fact, too much power lies between Ontario and Quebec, and not enough focus on Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And what you have also in Alberta is a very rich. It's very rich in the fossil fuel industry, very rich in the oil industry, and the people of Alberta feel that all of their economic resources, their oil and whatnot, gets sucked out of Alberta, goes to places like Ontario, Quebec, and the rest of Canada, and that they don't get a fair. They don't get a fair say in the redistribution of wealth and whatnot. And while Canada does in general tends to be sort of socially more liberal compared to the United States, Alberta and Saskatchewan tend to be both fiscally conservative as well as socially conservative. And then so that's a very good segue to talk about the Freedom Convoy. And the Freedom Convoy, as you know, all things COVID became very, very polarizing. There was lots of divisions amongst the left, which I still don't quite understand why that is, but regardless of that, there was lots of divisions amongst the left, on what should be the response to COVID. And a lot of leftists, I won't name them or anything like that, and I certainly won't name any outlets, but lots of leftists felt that COVID was, how can I say, that it was a plandemic or that it was a scamdemic and stuff like that, which I won't go into because I don't want your channel to be censored. But the very thorny issues of vaccines came and vaccine mandates and stuff like that. And in Canada, we also had a yellow vest movement, but it was completely different from what took place in France, because what took place in France was really was really a reaction towards austerity, and the fact that many French workers would have had to pay more for the gas that they use and stuff like that, and the way Macron went about it, wasn't smart, wasn't good, and was sort of further punishing the poor and the working class and so forth. And in Canada, we had something similar. We had a yellow vest movement, but it was more sort of a fake right-wing populism. I hate to use the term populism, but it was very much a fake right-wing populist sort of stuff. People demanding that Alberta have way more say over their economic affairs. But what it really was is basically, when you hear Albertans talk about Western alienation and they would like much more power for Alberta, what they really mean when you really, really, really dig deep into their politics is they just want to have the freedom to have to build more pipelines, build nothing but pipelines and oil and stuff like that. And of course, with the whole climate crisis and so forth, scientists overwhelmingly say that we need to keep our fossil fuels in the ground and so forth like that. So it's a very touchy subject in Canada, very thorny issue. And as I mentioned, Alberta is where you get sort of the worst of both worlds, where you have very extreme fiscal conservatism with a very extreme social regression, social conservatism. And with COVID, the way that Canada, like most governments, implemented lockdowns, implemented the shutting down of businesses, basically the people weren't bailed out. All of the big corporations, all of the big companies and whatnot, they were bailed out. But anyone with a small business, those who work in restaurants, or those who work in bars, or those who work at retail and what we call the gig economy, they were not bailed. They weren't bailed out at all. So many people lost their jobs. Many people who were forced to work from home were left without adequate bailout system and so forth. So many people then got very angry, and then many people fell prey to the far right, to the reactionary right, who don't want to have any restrictions, don't want to do anything to combat the pandemic, because they just want business to run as normal, everything to run as normal, and are just in complete denial that there is this highly infectious disease called COVID, and we do need to have sensible lockdowns and so forth. And unfortunately, with the left, as weak as we are, whether it's in Eastern Europe, whether it's in Western Europe, whether it's in the United States, Australia, and so forth, there wasn't a powerful left movement to vocally articulate that when we do have this pandemic, the people should be bailed out. People's rents and mortgages and taxes should have been suspended. We should have given people a UBI. We should have had a robust welfare system to actually bail out those. And if people did have to have their businesses shut down, we don't let them go bankrupt. We simply compensate them until the pandemic is overcome and so forth. And then, of course, the issue of of vaccines, whether the vaccines were, are 100% safe or not. A lot of far right movements weaponize that as well, and that's where we get to the Freedom Convoy. So the Freedom Convoy, contrary to contrary to what a lot of left-leaning anti-imperialists on Twitter and whatnot said, the Freedom Convoy was not this left-wing workers populist movement, because many of the truckers actually were already vaccinated. What the Freedom Convoy was basically a reactionary movement, a bunch of COVID minimalists, overwhelmingly COVID denialists, and they very much weaponized the whole issue of whether the vaccines were 100% safe or not. But basically, yeah, they were sort of weaponizing that and going on to Ottawa, the capital of Canada, to basically protest not just vaccine mandates and whatnot, and against vaccine mandates and mask mandates and very, very limited lockdowns which were implemented, but they basically also used it to also protest the Liberal government, which the far right in Canada sees as a Marxist, tyrannical government, which is anything but. Anyone who knows elementary stuff about Canadian politics knows that the Liberal government is very much a center-right government. Yes, they might be socially liberal, but fiscally they're very much neoliberalism and whatnot. And they might talk a good game about helping the poor and workers' rights and helping Indigenous people, and we're all for feminism, and we're all for LGBTQIA plus rights. But the Liberal Party, that's not their raison d'etre. The Liberal Party is very much what New Labour is in Britain, what the Democratic Party is, especially the sort of Clinton, Obama, Joe Biden wing of the party. That's what the Liberal Party is. It's a party of business. It's capitalism with a human face. And no, the Liberal Party is not anywhere near a center-left party, and is certainly not. Justin Trudeau is not a hidden, Chinese Marxist or even a Cuban Marxist. So.
I think that Justin Trudeau have a lot of common with Emmanuel Macron. This is the same type of guy chosen by the corporation.
Very much so. Very much so. Yes. Actually, do talk more about that. Do make that comparison more, because I actually would be quite interested in hearing that.
No, I think that Macron is the first. Maybe I will not talk about the similarities with Trudeau, because I don't know many about Trudeau. But what do you know? What do you want to know about Macron?
I would say I would say it's very much that. I think if Justin Trudeau was to join a party in France, oh wow, that actually is very interesting. But yeah, I think if Justin Trudeau was to join, I think if he was to use all of his because he does speak French, he is fluent in both in both English and French. I think he would definitely be part of Macron's En Marche party, which markets itself as a centrist party. It's not a left-wing party, it's not a right-wing party. It's just very much a centrist party that's open to a broad church. Yeah, I think that's definitely the similarities between Trudeau and Macron. But then when you actually do sort of confront them, well, what would you do about universal daycare? Well, what would you do about pharmacare? Or what would you do about public transportation? Are you for nationalizing it and making it free, or at least heavily subsidizing it? Trudeau wouldn't really have an answer, and if he would give an answer, it would be a very business friendly approach to it, like Macron.
Yes, about Macron, I can say one very important thing that today, when we are speaking, it is 20th of January, and yesterday we have a very big social movement in France. Because for these guys which didn't know, when Macron make a reform of the pensions in
Mhm.
2019, but because of the epidemic, he and because also of very big social movement which existed in the beginning of the 2020, it was continuation of the Yellow Vest movement. And Macron, he announced 16 March that now we have epidemic, you have to stay at home, but I am very good guy, and this reform of pensions is I quit this. So everybody were happy that yes, we are win this battle, but now he try one more time make this reform. 10 of January, the government announced this reform, and all the biggest trade unions in France, they decided that they together will make fight against this. So yesterday we have in in many places in France together 1 million people in the streets. Also the transport were blocked. And I will see how it will continue. But we need to say two important things. Firstly, that in January, the situation, economic situation of the poor people is much more worse, because it's in January a lot of things, the prices of a lot of things are growing up. For example, oil, that many months Macron, he because of the Yellow West movement which existed before, Macron were scared, and he talked with the total company that you need to make everything to lower the prices of oil. So in the last month, the prices of oil in France were the cheapest one in Europe, much more cheaper than in Germany, and cheaper even than in Poland.
Mhm.
I in October I make a trip toward Belgium, Holland, Germany, and Poland. And in every of these, of course, in Holland, I didn't stop to it. It only I was in Maastricht. It is
Ah,
some.
yes. I actually studied in Maastricht for a year. Funny. That's interesting.
Yes, yes, but it is some part of Netherlands which you need to cross to go to Germany. So but I regarded the I regarded no I watched regarded this in French. I watched the prices of oil, and in France the prices of oil were the cheapest one in Europe. But it's finished in 31 of December. Now we have prices like in Belgium. Um, so Macron, he announced the pension reform in the time when we have economic crisis because of the stupid politic of the European Union towards the Russia. And the third thing, we need to remember that this reform were autocratic, that
Yes.
it was against the will of the parliament. This is the constitution of the France, which is the Fifth Republic of France. It is an authoritarian state with very big power of president, and in the time of Macron, all the important decisions are making not by the vote of the parliament, but by the decree of president, and that's also, it is authoritarian state. So it is the time we are talking in the time when the very important class struggle is started. Um, so uh, so I already started the topic. My favorite topics, maybe not favorite, but the last 10 months, all the time we need to talk about this. You also talk all the time about this. Of course, the war in Ukraine, and
Oh yes, one of my favorite thorny topics.
yes. But before we start to talk about Ukraine, I would ask about the Ukrainian population in Canada, because I heard that a lot of Nazi collaborators, the collaborators from responsible of killing of Polish population in Wołyń in 1943 and 1944, they escaped to the west, and most of them they escaped to Canada. So could you say something about this?
In fact, let me. I'm even going to pull up, because there are some important expat communities I want to mention. So I'm actually going to try to find, the names of some of that. But basically, yeah, just before I answer that question, there's another thing about the Freedom Convoy I completely forgot to mention. So as I mentioned, because of the very bad response to the coronavirus, not bailing out the working class, not compensating businesses which had to close down, and letting many businesses, small businesses that is, go bankrupt. Many people who were angry and frustrated then fell prey to a lot of COVID minimalists, people who said that COVID is just like the flu and it's really harmless, and straight up COVID denialists. And the far right very much weaponized that. So many, so many of the working class who have been, who the Liberal Party constantly takes for granted, and even our third major party, the NDP, and even the Green Party, all take for granted, all don't really fight for their basic needs on a good day. And I think many people then fell prey to the whole far right movement, which weaponized, people's frustrations and confusions when it came to all things COVID. And when we did have the Freedom Convoy, people who were protesting against vaccine mandates and demanding that people, if they want to take, the vax, it should be a choice, and many people who were very hesitant about taking the vaccine because they felt that it was made too quickly and whatnot. So when all of that culminated in the Freedom Convoy, where many people were honking their truck signs, making quite a lot of noises, and it was very much far right. Maybe there were one or two people who had legitimate concerns about the vaccine, but it was overwhelmingly a far right movement. People who are part of the Wexit movement. These are people in Alberta and Saskatchewan who would like who would like to be their own country and secede from Canada so that they can extract all the fossil fuels they want, and not be dressed down by the liberal elites of Canada, or of Canada and Quebec. And when these people were making quite a lot of noises and waving, MAGA, Make America Great Again, and waving, the Canadian flag, which for the left in Canada, the Canadian flag, many people are trying to distance themselves from left nationalism and whatnot because they're much more sensitive to the plight of Indigenous people and stuff like that. So to see many, people waving the Canadian flag for the left, it was like, okay, this is clearly a right-wing movement. This is clearly a far-right movement. And when these truckers are making all sorts of noises and demanding not just the end of all vaccine mandates and masks and stuff like that, they were also demanding an overthrow of the liberal government. And when they were making quite a lot of noise pollutions and being quite, quite a nuisance, the Canadian government under Justin Trudeau then decided that they were going to evict them by evoking the Emergencies Act. And the Emergencies Act, I hope I'm getting that name correctly. This was an act that was passed in World War One, which basically, it was a law used to silence anti-war protesters, unions, and left movements and people power movements. And it was used by Justin Trudeau's father in the 70s when there was a terrorist attack in Canada by Quebec separatists, and when they had kidnapped a politician and murdered him, Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father of the same party, invoked the Emergencies Act and basically suspended civil liberties, really suppressed, Quebec people power movements, unions, and whatnot in Quebec, which only further inflamed the Quebec independence movement. And so it's a law which gives the government carte blanche to suspend people's civil liberties, and they could use it to detain people without trial and stuff like that. So Trudeau threatened to use the Emergencies Act to evict the Freedom Convoy, and the Conservative Party, the main opposition, was very much against it. The Conservative Party actually, much of them were actually, in favor of, actually supported the Freedom Convoy, regardless of their, I think ridiculous, demands and whatnot. And even the NDP, the third major party, were all very supportive of Trudeau using the Emergencies Act. And it was when that happened, when they threatened to use it, that was when the Freedom Convoy, slow by slow, started to dissolve themselves and started to, go away from the scene. There's more I could add about that, but that was the whole Freedom Convoy in a nutshell. And I have to stress, it was not a left-wing populist movement. It was very much a far-right movement, regardless of what some of our comrades in the left anti-imperialist movement would, say about it. and then, yeah.
Yeah,
Going
so
back to your,
maybe I will say one thing that
go ahead.
6 years I worked in the I unload the truck. I'm working in the Freeland storehouse. And because I know Russian language and Polish language, and the half of the truck drivers in European Union, they are from Eastern Europe, so they send me there to because I can communicate with these truck drivers. So it is also one of the reasons why I am interested about this movement. And of course I am agree with you that the most of the demands of these people are crazy.
Yeah.
But I am like I can say traditional Marxist who believe that the most important force to fight with the capitalism, it is working class, and this working class which produce something which is necessary to existing economy, a capitalist economy, and the drivers is one of the key sector of the economy. So um, every time when some part of the working class are fighting, always I am interesting what are they doing, what do they thinking, and I know that my strategy towards the working fighting workers have to be different to my strategy towards the fighting students or intelligentsia movement. When the students movement say something stupid, I am against it without any problem. When workers say something stupid, my critique is less aggressive, because I always try to make some relation, some contacts with working class.
Exactly. I think the only problem, my only problem with those, with those on the left who were, I'm gonna call them anti-vax extremists. Those who were, those who were very much, fundamentalists. They were like very much like anti-vax fundamentalists, and my only problem with those is even when when I would listen to their concerns about the safety of the vaccines and so forth, I would always try to respond to some of them very rationally by saying, okay, let's say that it's true that that the vaccine isn't 100% safe. Don't you think then that we need to go back into 6-month lockdown to defeat to overcome COVID? But when we do go under lockdown, we bail out the people. We compensate businesses which have to be closed for a temporary time. We don't let them go bankrupt, and and we make sure that the working class, the working poor, are all taken care of. They're not just left to fend for themselves, and not left to fend for themselves. And my only problem was the responses I kept getting was a left which did not even want to try to fight for that. Just people who were very much, I think, just having a very immature response to the pandemic and just wanted to put their heads in the sand and say that, like, COVID's not real. This is COVID's not real, and even if it is real, it's just another flu and so forth. So that was my only problem with a lot of those on the left who expressed anti-vax positions and, of course, anti-lockdown positions. And
But wait. I need to say that in first weeks of the epidemic, I was extremist, but extremist in the other sense. I watched the politic of Cuba, politic of Vietnam, other socialist state, and I was 100% sure that the vaccination it is the better way.
yes,
And even I was criticized by a lot of leftists that, for example, when Macron he introduced the vaccine, I vaccinate myself. I make video with this vaccine to show that and I was criticized that I am not real Marxist because I am
you
my
were a shill for a big pharma.
yes, my brain was I'm corrupted and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah. There's a period of time where I even had to stop, covering the pandemic because I would just get very, very bizarre responses. I had some people who really were, COVID, minimalists and borderline COVID denialists, and I had other people who, when I would ask them, okay, what should be the left's response to the pandemic, they said, that, like, well, we need to bail out the people. We do need to have mandates, but we do need to make sure that the vaccine's safe. And if it's not safe, we go back into lockdowns. But again, the emphasis from those voices of reasons, which for some reason got completely pushed aside, was an emphasis on bailing out the people. And it's a pity that something like the pandemic, which I felt was was really a golden opportunity for the left to really make themselves heard and really respond rationally. It's a pity that it became it seems like most topics just yeah, way too
Yes,
polarized.
yes, but now when the war in Ukraine started, my position is changed. Now I didn't know, I don't know what to think because in Poland we have the situation. You know a lot of Poland because you are listening all the time, Boyan. So you know that the Boyan today is. So we can say authoritarian state with very repressive politics of the police, and many months the police were very repressive toward the Polish population. You don't have mask, we will pay money,
Yeah,
we
that
will
was
close.
stupid. That was definitely very stupid.
Yes, and in the and after when the war in Ukraine started, there were millions of the migrants, refugees from Ukraine who came to Poland, and there are two things which change a little my position. First thing, media totally stopped to talk about COVID didn't exist. They talked about COVID all the time, and after 24th of February, they stopped totally. Nobody care about this. Second thing, they talk that you can't go to shop, you can't go there without mask, and without vaccination. Everywhere we will check you are vaccinated or not. And after millions, and I am saying I don't know, 5 millions, 6 millions Ukrainian citizens cross Polish borders. Nobody checked if they are vaccinated or not. Nobody tested them. And with this, now I started to think maybe these crazy guys, maybe they are not so crazy. Maybe it me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even though it it's interesting what you were saying because even though those of us on the left who did not join in lionizing the freedom convoy and did call a spade that these were far right knuckle dragging Neanderthals and these were basically anti-science nincompoops and so forth like that, they won though in the end. I mean, when the left gets gets into the streets and demands defunding the police or stronger workers' rights or an end to NATO and an end to endless Cold Wars with Russia and China, we're very much. I mean, we're not. I mean, our protests aren't even reported on, and we're very much just sort of pushed to the side and very much marginalized in the few places where we can air our views, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth like that. But the Freedom Convoy, even though they were very much, denounced in the media, denounced by most of the political leaders, except for the Conservative Party and the People's Party of Canada, but they got what they want because in the end of the day, because in the end of the day, all of the mandates were lifted. All of the, all of the very minimalist lockdowns were lifted. All of the vaccine mandates were lifted, and now people don't have to even wear hospital masks, wherever they go. So I think that's a sad state of affairs that the right wing, from the center to the far right to the nutty right, always gets whatever they want, and yet with our, I think, noble and more sensible people power movements, when we get to the streets, there's just it's just completely ignored, and we're pushed to the side. So that's a very that's a very interesting note to make.
Okay, so let's talk about banderites in Canada. Because I heard that there is even one minister in government, which her grandfather, he was a member of UPA. He was one of the guy responsible for the killing the Polish population, and she is very active to helping the she's very active to make lobbying to sending weapons and money to Zelensky and his friends.
Yes. Oh wow. Where to even begin on all of that? But yes, well, I'll give a bit of a more background.
Maybe say what is her name. I will find her.
Chrystia Freeland. I'm not sure. I believe she is the deputy prime minister now of Canada. But what she was before that, she was the foreign minister, and a very powerful foreign minister. Chrystia Freeland is her name, and her background is she was a journalist that worked for a lot of very business friendly, very business friendly institutions, corporate corporate media, Business Insider, and stuff like that. And she had done a book called. She had done a book called Plutocrats: The Rise of the New Global Super Rich and the Fall of Everyone Else, and worked for the Financial Times and so forth. And yes, and she was a minister, and she's a member of she was a member of Parliament, and she was Justin Trudeau's Liberal minister, and Richard Sanders, a brilliant historian, investigative journalist, and peace activist of the Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade. He actually exposed that Chrystia Freeland's, I believe, grandfather, Mikhail Chomiak, was basically he was the editor of a Nazi newspaper in occupied Ukraine. And Freeland's background, as Richard Sanders and others have dug deeper into her, she actually came very much from she like her father was literally a Nazi propagandist in occupied Ukraine, and the civil society group which Freeland hails from, because I forgot to answer your question about the expat community in Canada. Well, she and her parents, I'm not sure about her grandfather, but certainly her parents, they were part of a Ukrainian civil society expats group called the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, and she was part of the Ukrainian Youth Association, and I was also a member of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Wrote for some of their newspaper publications, and this organization was literally founded by runaway Nazi war criminals, and they continue to lionize Stepan Bandera. They continue to lionize this infamous Nazi collaborator and an out and out fascist, an out and out Nazi. This wasn't a guy who who simply this wasn't a guy who was equally against both Nazism and Soviet communism. No, this was an out and out Nazi who did believe in the ideology and so forth. So when the Nazis came, he was a willing accomplice in not just going after communists, but also persecuting Jews, Ukrainian Jews, persecuting persecuting Polish people, and anyone else that was on the hit list of the Nazis and so forth, and a big believer in the Judeo-Bolshevik theories and all sorts of out and out anti-Semitic and anti left nonsense and whatnot. And yeah, that's where Freeland hails from. If you dig very very deep into those those uh, expat civil society groups. They were all very much funded by the Canadian government, and they were very much founded by not just runaway Nazi war criminals, not Nazi collaborators, but they were funded to the teat knowingly by the Canadian government the moment the Cold War, the moment the Cold War kicked off, and these very and these very institutions, which are still alive and well, they continue to lionize their founders. They continue to lionize such and such a Nazi war criminal, such and such a Nazi collaborator, and they continue to advocate for not just NATO but endless Cold Wars on Russia, even if the current president is a fiscal conservative, social conservative. So you would think that they would have much more in common and get along with Putin. But anywho, but in order to justify their existence, they have to have these ridiculous, Cold Wars. They have to have, NATO and so forth. And yes, and they continue and they back the most reactionary elements of Ukraine. So
Wait. I found this newspaper um, which author was the grandfather of this woman.
Chrystia
So
Freeland, yeah, and
yes,
Mikhail Chomiak,
so
if I'm
it is, yes, so it is Krakow News. Krakow is the Polish city, but it was a time when the Krakow was occupied by the German, and the Krakow was the capital of the General Gubernia, is the place where resided the Hans Frank. He was guy responsible for killing a lot of Polish people population and also Jewish population. And we see here that in this occupied Poland, they create this Krakow News in Ukrainian language, and it was orchestrated by the Joseph Goebbels, this propaganda which was there. So it is even more than participation in the Volyn massacre, but because some of the Ukrainians, they say yes, there were some tension, the Poles killed Ukrainians, Ukrainians killed Poles. Oh, it's better forget about this. But
yes.
guy who is who created newspapers, which the only reason to exist this newspaper was to promote the Goebbels propaganda in Ukrainian language. It is very very responsible for this promotion of the Nazi ideology.
Well, what I love about sorry to interrupt, but just reading this, what I love about this is that it's in plain sight. Like if you do elementary research, Chrystia Freeland's grandfather, who she continues to lionize, who she just dismisses all this as Russian propaganda, as junk journalism that comes from RT or comes from global research. I mean, it literally says on just Wikipedia, her grandfather's name is right there, editor in chief, political alignment, Nazi party, and it's just astonishing that that she can be
But
that she can just
wait, do you
dismiss.
know how I found this? Because I read her English article in Wikipedia, but wasn't this information. This information about this was in Russian Wikipedia, in Russian language. In Russian language,
Okay.
they make this, and in English she deleted, I think, or maybe I didn't find, but normally I found things like this very
Well,
easy.
Well, what's also crazy is let me get the name of organizations like the Ukrainian Canadian Congress or Canadian Slovak League or the Slovak World League, Lithuanian World Community, Lithuanian Canadian Community, Latvian National Federation in Canada, the Estonian World Congress, Estonian Central Council in Canada, the League of Ukrainian Canadians, and Ukrainian Youth Association. What's astonishing though about all these groups with these seemingly benign names and stuff like that is all of them without all of them lionize these Nazi collaborators and so forth, and they insist that whatever crimes they may have done, they were they were equal freedom fighters. They fought against both the Nazis and Soviet communism, and they only had to do a temporary truce with the Nazis as a way to overthrow Soviet imperialism and their stuff. And when we look at parties in Ukraine, like Right Sector, Svoboda, and these are the people that really, really out and out lionize Stepan Bandera and do their salutes and have all sorts of, Nazi-inspired symbols or and whatnots. That organization, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, is very much associated, very much supports the most reactionary right-wing movements in Ukraine, which are explicitly anti-Russian.
Do you see do you see this map of Canada is in yellow and blue?
That's astonishing. And look at that, and then then I'm looking at where they're demanding, and like look at that, they literally use like the far right symbolism of a bandera and now of Svoboda and Right Sector, who you cannot just say, oh yeah, they're very nationalistic, but they're really not Nazi inspired. No, these are very much like Nazi Nazi movement and so forth. So that's just incredible, though, unbelievable. And yes, and yes, and
But
they.
wait. I click this frequently asked question because I wanted to know what do they think about the Bandera and what do they vote about. But the only question is how to give money to them, how to donate.
Fascinating, unbelievable. But
Where to
yeah,
donate?
I believe it was Yasha Levine who your audience should definitely check out. He's this Ukrainian Jewish American. A Ukrainian Jewish American and fantastic journalist. And he was one of the first journalists to expose that who the West is supporting in Ukraine are a bunch of neo Nazis, are reactionary movements, and he said it straight up in an interview that Ukraine, it's a complex society. Yes, there are divisions between Western Ukrainians and Eastern Ukrainians because of the very complicated history that goes back to Tsarist Russia, Soviet Russia, and even post communist. But I think he said it best when it comes to Svoboda, the Right Sector, and these neo Banderites or just out and out Banderites. He said it like that the U.S. and its allies backed the most reactionary movements in Ukraine, and I think once I started to read up on his journalism and read up on what Richard Sanders exposed, that was when I radically decolonized my mind and stopped sort of I guess de facto supporting the West's actions in Ukraine and in much of Eastern Europe.
Okay, so we watched together the internet site of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, And could you compare the ethnic politic of the Canada towards the indigenous people and the ethnic politic of the banderist movements toward all the nations which are not Ukrainians?
I I definitely don't have these statistics in front of me to answer that accurately, but I would say in Canada, like much of the West, specifically, I think specifically the United States is there
Wait,
is
wait, 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 wait.
yeah, yeah,
I heard that even 3 or 4 years ago, the Canadian Indians, the native
yes.
population, they were sterilized. It's true or not?
Well, actually, before I try to even find the answer to that, because I was going to answer some of the demographics, but basically, yeah, Canada is a very white society. It's probably a bit more multiracial compared to other places, but it's overwhelmingly a very much a large white society. WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, with Quebec definitely a huge French Catholic population, and yeah, and then but in terms of minorities, ironically enough, despite history of brutal dispossession, uh, genocide and whatnot of even entire peoples. The indigenous population of Canada that that you mentioned, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. The First Nations, those that you will find in Ontario, Alberta, Quebec, Manitoba, and so forth, is actually the largest minority population. We actually have much more. We actually have a larger indigenous Canadian population than Black Canadians, for example. And what happened in Canada was, even though there was a large Eastern European immigration into Canada, which was often met with brutality, because many of them were leftists. Many of them were leftists. Many of them were Jewish people fleeing anti-Semitism, and many of them were involved in left movements, socialist, social democratic movement, communist movements, and stuff like that. But Canada was always quite strict, though, about its immigration. Funny enough, and even when the Nazis took over Germany and were persecuting Jewish people, a lot of those Jewish Eastern Europeans, uh, uh, you know Germans of a Jewish background, when they were trying to flee to Canada, they were told basically to F off. We're not allowing you in. In fact, I should laugh about this, but this is how deep the anti-Semitism goes. When the minister, was asked about trying to allow these refugees in because of the persecution they were faced. I think the minister said that one is too many and none is too many, something like that. And the Prime Minister of Canada, of the Liberal Party, my add, William Mackenzie King, I believe was his name. The guy was a vicious anti Semite, and would even express his anti-Semitic views, and was very much supportive of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, and would support their efforts in defeating the democratic socialists of Spain and whatnot. And when there was immigration coming from those countries, specifically Ukraine, who were involved in workers' rights and trying to strengthen the power of unions, many of them were sent to internment camps, literally concentration camps and internment camps. And So Canada was very strict. Canada was what I'm trying to say is that Canada was very strict about what kinds of Eastern European, what kinds of Jewish Europeans they would allow into the country. And the only time Canada actually tolerated a big boom in immigration and stuff like that was after World War II. But the kinds of expats, the kinds of Eastern European expats they would allow in from Estonia, Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, and whatnot, were basically those who had ties to Nazism and fascism. So that's so I wanted to make that perfectly clear. And right now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you were asking about the indigenous population. I'm pretty sure that Canada did do sterilization amongst its indigenous people. Canada was Canada, like the United States, like Australia, like New Zealand, was very brutal to its indigenous population. And right now, Canada is its colonial past. It's being reckoned with. And so they had the brutal residential school programs where they forcibly, took young children away from their parents, made them go to schools where they were beaten if they spoke their indigenous languages. Forcibly, their
You are
heritage.
speaking about the Catholic schools.
All schools, but the Catholic schools were the largest offenders, especially in Quebec, where for a long period of time up until the 60s, the Catholic Church more or less ran the show in Quebec. And yes, but the Catholic Church was the biggest offenders. Other churches as well, but the Catholic Church was very much the biggest offenders of human rights abuses. And Canada, I can't, and yes, Canada did sterilize a lot of indigenous people. How systemic that was, I definitely cannot say. But whatever awful thing you have read about what Canada has done to its indigenous people, I'm just going to say it's most likely true. And the reason why I say that is because when I went to school in California, and I learned about, the brutal apartheid and racial persecution that Native Americans suffered under, it was only, when my teacher would explain to us that, yes, a lot of indigenous people died from diseases like smallpox and stuff like that. She made it seem as if the white people did not know about these infectious diseases, and that it was just an accident that indigenous people were infected by all of these diseases. Ergo, that's how they died. But it was only when I started to do, my own research and actually started to read books by indigenous historians and actually watch documentaries about, America's still ongoing brutal subjugation of indigenous people that I would, that you read that no, the white settler colonialists intentionally gave indigenous people smallpox by giving them, tissues and curtains and bed sheets where they explicitly gave them, smallpox, and that was how you had literally entire nations of people who were, just genocide, and not genocided like, there was a few hundred survivors, but like an out and out successful genocide of entire people. So Canada did the exact same thing. I know for a fact in America there was particularly during the era of the eugenics movement in the Gilded Age, in the progressive era, America did forcibly sterilize a lot of its indigenous people. And if America did it, I'm pretty sure Canada did it as well. So yeah, that's to answer your question. Anything that you've heard that the settler colonial state might have done, most likely it probably is true, because look at what they actually did in practice and what we actually know on record. So yeah.
So can you say that they opened their borders of Canada to the Banderais? It is because Banderais have experience in the ethnic cleansing, or what other reason they invited them?
That's that's a very good question. I would say, well, funny enough, Canada, funny enough, Canada, even when Canada joined World War II, more or less as an extension of the British Empire, and even though Canada was allies with the Soviet Union in the fight against fascism, you still had in Canada, the Communist Party of Canada was banned for a very long time, and there are still laws on the books that says an employer can fire such and such a person if they are a communist, if they are a member of the Communist Party of Canada, and so forth. And like I mentioned, Canada was very much, even if Canada didn't send its troops to Spain to fight alongside alongside the Nazis and the fascist Italy and Franco's forces. Canada, more or less, was very much supportive of Franco's efforts. They didn't have an arms ban, to Franco's side. Those socialists and communists and whatnot who went from Canada to fight against the Nazis and so forth, many of them were thrown in jail when they came back. In fact, Canada even passed a law that said that if you're a Canadian, you cannot fight in a foreign army. Of course, Canada doesn't stop Canadian Jews from fighting in Israel, and Canada didn't do that with with a lot of Canada still doesn't do that with with those in the Canadian army who wanted to actually fight in Vietnam and whatnot. So yeah, and I
And
think,
did they stop the Ukrainians who are going now to Ukraine to fighting for the
oh,
Zelensky?
haven't Canada's not stopped that. Canada has not stopped those who want to volunteer and fight in Ukraine and fight specifically with the Azov with the Azov battalion. And I think to answer directly your question, yeah, Canada certainly always has been a supporter of fascism. Canada even was completely fine and supportive of Japan's invasion of Manchuria in China. So when the Cold War came about, and the new boogeyman was, or the long-standing boogeyman was the Soviet Union. Canada actively seeked out, communities of Ukrainians and other Eastern Europeans who were anti-communist. I'm sure some of those people who were fleeing, political persecution from the Soviets, uh, had legitimate concerns, had legitimate grievances against the Soviet Union, but overwhelmingly, Canada, accepted, families and people that had Nazi skeletons in their closets. And now, of course, with NATO, Canada needs to justify, why it's a member of NATO and so forth. And Canada is still very much seeking out those weaponized immigrants who use a lot of half truths and full on fake news in order that they get their money from Canada, and that they continue to support their far right forces and other reactionary forces in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe and even in Russia itself. So
Okay, I will show you some guy which were a little famous in Poland, but I suppose you didn't heard about him. So it is the guy who who was born in Canada. She was the Indian from Canada, and but his mother was from Poland, and they come back to Poland, and he fight in the Warsaw Uprising. Um, mm,
Interesting.
yes, yes, but after in socialist Poland, um, he was he was very famous because he was the only Indian, Polish Indian in the country. So he created um, some society of the Polish Indians. But before and also he wrote a lot of books about this stuff. But there is some story very interesting that after war he worked in the shipyard, in the ship. So he traveled a lot. He visited all the continents in the world. Um, and also one day he go to Canada. He go to Canada near to place where he was born and he grew up. And he heard that all his family member were killed by the racists from Canada. And in the bar, he was very angry and he starting to fight with some Canadian guys. And they also wanted to make him something bad, but because there were a lot of Polish guys with these Polish Indians, so it was big.
I'll have to look into that because I know there are some cases of what they call uh of what they call a pretendian, people who fake their indigenous background for whatever personal gain. Although I think it's a little bit exaggerated, but I'm gonna have to look into this guy because that's fascinating. That's fascinating and funny enough, the only war, yeah, because that's
Yes,
fascinating.
I will show you his photo because here. Uh, uh, uh,
Polish indigenous. I've never heard of that. But that's interesting.
uh, no, but he's a half. And in the time of the Warsaw uprising, he even didn't speak Polish. He speak a little word, but he was a very good soldier because he fight in the conspiration in the forest like the partisan. So he knew some techniques how to go to the forest. So he was very useful. Uh,
Interesting.
yes, but in the socialist Poland, after he became normal Pole, he started to speak Polish language. But when he was they starting to use him and help him to promote his Indian tradition. It was a time when he was already old. I don't know, 50s or say. First in the first years he was they didn't care who you are, you need to work. But after they okay, we also will have our Indian guy. And
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to. Thanks for bringing this up because I'm gonna have to do some research and ask some friends of mine in Canada to do some digging into it because that's fascinating. Fascinating. I'll just say that. But then I have to ask a little bit. Was he part of of good movements in Poland, or was he part of the very reactionary counter-revolution right-wing movements in Poland?
No, I don't think that he was interesting about the Polish politics.
Okay. Wasn't part of Pope John Paul II or the pseudo leftists of Solidarity's counter-revolutionary movement.
Yes, but I think that this story that when he come back to Canada, he fight with the Canadian guys and the Polish help him, show something that for him his homeland it was Poland, not Canada. Uh, and I don't know. It is true that they killed their family, or they make something about his family, or or maybe they send them in the other places. But one of the reason why this mother came back to Poland was that she when she came back when she came to Canada like a Polish woman, everybody were nice to her. When she started to be a mother of the not white guy, it changed.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting. But yeah, that's quite yeah that is quite fascinating. And actually, what's also interesting though in Canada, as well as the United States, as well as Australia. I can't comment too much about New Zealand because New Zealand has 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 a much better, there are much better race relations between the Maori people in New Zealand and the rest of white New Zealand, or white multiracial, multi-ethnic New Zealand. But in Canada, for example, there are no war monuments to those Canadians that fought and defended their country against the British and white settler colonialism. But there are hundreds of hundreds, maybe I'm exaggerating, but there are monuments to those indigenous Canadians that fought in all of these imperial wars, like World War One, World War Two, Vietnam War, Afghanistan War, and so forth like that. So that's an interesting thing, in its of itself. But that's why I find this person that you mentioned, that's a fascinating background, and I'll have to definitely gonna have to dig more deeper into that.
Okay, so my last question, I think the answer is very easy and quick, but I heard in some of the conversation you said that in the past you have contact with Labour Party in Britain, that you were invited by the Jeremy Corbyn or something like this. You make interview with Jeremy Corbyn, and the question is, what do you think about the position of the Western left, especially Social Democrats, towards the war in Ukraine? That most of these parties are very, very extremely aggressive, Russophobic. They support all the kind of the sanctions, all the sending the weapons, even sending the troops. The most craziest one, I think, is the Polish party Razem together. It's very funny that Boyan, he very often said that he voted for this party. He voted for the Razem party because this is from the economic perspective, it is the leftist, the most leftist parties, and in the same time, the most leftist parties are the most Russophobic party. the most crazy guys. They were part of the some so-called international created by the Yanis Varoufakis in the European, but they quitted this international because say you are not enough Russophobic. Uh, you are not enough Russophobic. We can't collaborate with you. We and so how you explain this?
Very good question. Yes. Well, I'll clarify. I'll clarify some stuff. So what happened was, before I started 1+1, when I was just job hunting, for journalism, for journalism jobs, or just trying to find an internship. Because I'm in Belgium, I get exposed a lot to UK news and to UK culture, because one of the only English channels you get in on Belgium TV is the BBC and stuff like that. So there was a period where I was getting very much where I was following a lot UK news, and especially with the Jeremy Corbyn phenomenon, the Jeremy Corbyn project, he was getting a lot of coverage because I mean, hey, this leftist literally won the leadership of the Labour Party, which the Labour Party, funny enough, I'll just say, even when they were a socialist party on paper, they were always a anti-worker, imperialist party, Zionist party, and whatnot, just like a rival, oligarchic, party to the conservative party. But I was very fascinated by Jeremy Corbyn because he beat the odds. He literally had popular people power movements all flock to the Labour Party and campaign for him. So it was quite fascinating. But I had noticed that there was very, very deep divisions amongst the UK left when it came to the very thorny topic of Brexit. And of course, the smear campaign, which ultimately defeated Jeremy Corbyn, which was that he was an anti-Semite, or certainly his pro-Palestinian positions attracted a lot of anti-Semites, which of course was BS. But there
Yes,
you
it is
go.
BS because Palestine are also Semites.
That that is true, but many of the people who were accused of being anti-Semites, who had to be suspended and expelled from the Labour Party, were Jewish anti-Zionists, which and so it was going to be Jeremy Corbyn's final time of being leader of the Labour Party, and I said to myself, I have got to go to the UK and cover this for an outlet. And then I actually reached out to the late Glenn Ford, who was the executive editor of Black Agenda Reports, and asked, and basically I pitched to him. I said to him, "Hey, look, I'm very much interested in your outlets. Can I do interviews for you? Can I do interviews on behalf of your outlet? And can I cover the Labour Party conference on behalf of Black Agenda Reports?" And told him about all this fascinating stuff that was happening in the UK, that there was deep divisions on the left about Brexit. There were those who were EU left reformists and those who were of the left but wanted to leave the European Union because they view the European Union as a neoliberal institution and so forth. And some of their arguments definitely were vindicated. And then Glenn Ford said, "Yeah, sure, go right ahead. Cover the Labour Party conference for us, and we'll figure it out." And I was going to, and it was going to do. Me and Glenn, at the end of the day, because I had so much material, we decided that we were going to split the articles into three parts. For lots of complicated reasons, that ended up not being the case. But yes, long story short, I covered the Labour Party conference on behalf of Black Agenda Reports when it was in what ended up being the last time Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the opposition. And it was quite a fascinating thing, because what was very sad, I felt, about Jeremy Corbyn and the movement behind him was you had this guy who on paper he had the best CV you could ever ask a socialist politician to have. Like, he has spent his entire life fighting for workers' rights, has spent his entire life fighting against racism and fighting for black people in Britain, and also has spent his entire life being anti-NATO, even opposing NATO's actions against Serbia when it was not a popular thing to do amongst the left. And Jeremy Corbyn was against the bombing of Serbia and the breakup of Yugoslavia. Jeremy Corbyn himself, not only was he always very much, Palestine justice, but he was also a Lexiteer. He was not an EU left reformist. He was always actually anti the European Union, but from a leftist perspective, because his hero, his mentor was Tony Benn. But then, as he became leader of the Labour Party, he had to sort of modify a lot of those positions. So he had to be an EU left reformist of a Yanis Varoufakis, not a flaming, Lexiteer like his mentor Tony Benn would have been, and so forth. So there was very deep divisions amongst the left in the UK, which I was trying to cover. And when I was there, it was hard to find. It was hard to find somebody of the left who was anti-EU. It was as if there was like a gag order. That's that if you were on the left, you had to be for the European Union or self-censor yourself. So that was quite fascinating. And then when I was there, it was quite intense to see just the deep divisions amongst pro-Zionist forces and Jewish anti-Zionists. And yet, oddly enough, Jeremy Corbyn, instead of calling BS to the smear campaign, him and his followers kept saying, there is an anti-Semitism crisis, but we're dealing with it. Instead of just saying BS, this is a smear campaign, and using it as the perfect opportunity to explain to people what Zionism is and to explain to people why the Palestinians deserve our compassion and deserve our solidarity. And when I was covering the Labour Party conference, it was just bizarre that Jeremy Corbyn had here was a even when it came to the issue of the European Union, even though Jeremy Corbyn kept saying that he would have liked that Britain remained in the European Union but reformed it from a left perspective, he also never pitched that for Britain, it was not all doom and gloom if the UK leaves the European Union. So he never ever made that left case that, hey guys, it's not all doom and gloom, because look, we can much more easily nationalize our public railways. We can we will be able to nationalize this industry and that industry. Jeremy Corbyn never ever made that case, which I always thought was very strange as a guy who has spent his entire career being a Lexiteer, but then, adopted the kind of Yanis Varoufakis EU left reformism. But the entire time, he never ever said to those EU left reformists, those on the left, that like, hey, it's not all doom and gloom leaving the European Union because of look what we can do outside of the European Union. So I had to, so it was, I don't know, he was Jeremy Corbyn. Nice guy, not the best politician though, and I think also just had very bad advisors. But I'll let you ask me anything else that you might be fascinated about during my time there.
Yes, but the question was about the leftist politics to Ukraine. The majority of these parties are wide.
Why are
Because I remember war in Iraq in 2003, and many social democrats in Europe, they have good position, and they
now
so they understand what is Western imperialism in Iraq or Afghanistan, but then they don't understand what is Western imperialism in Eastern Europe.
Oh wow, that's a good question. I can only give my own opinions based on what I've observed studying, Ukraine, talking with people who are anti-imperialists on Ukraine and so forth. I think this is my yeah. This is my theory. This is my 2 cents on it. I think when it comes to the Iraq War, and that's a very good point that you brought up. I'm often baffled that 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 we have folks who would have marched against the Vietnam War, marched against the Iraq War, even if they didn't get Libya and Syria right. If you explain to them that this is a Western imperial project, you'll be able to convince them, and they will they'll organize a march against the war. But for some bizarre reason, when it comes to Ukraine or Eastern European affairs, those same hardcore anti-imperialists who understand imperialism in the Middle East, imperialism in Latin America, and maybe a few parts of Africa are very much pro-imperialism. And I think that probably goes back to the fact that in Eastern Europe, because much of what we call the left, whether they're social democrats and whatnot, I think because many of them were anti-communist leftists. So they might have been against the Vietnam War because, it's very ugly, what the Americans are doing to the Vietnamese people and so forth like that. But they still, in the end of the day, they do believe they may be leftists, but they're anti-communist leftists, which is why you had so many on the left, unions, peace groups, and whatnot, that were very supportive of the counter-revolutionary efforts and the color revolutions that happened across the former USSR and the Warsaw Pact and so forth like that. And I think because Western imperialists, when it comes to Latin America, they just straight up use the military. They straight up empower, right-wing military juntas and stuff like that. It's much more easier to organize a pro-peace demonstration, an anti-war demonstration, and a Latin America solidarity efforts, whether it's a coup in Chile or a coup in Bolivia or whatever Cold War politics that was inflicted in Latin America, and even now, and even nowadays, even though, and I think with Eastern Europe, even though there isn't that anti-communist Cold War thing that's going on because Putin's not a communist. He's very much a fiscal conservative and in social conservatism, but you have those hangovers of that Cold War politics. And I think when it comes to Eastern Europe, in which the US, Canada did not overthrow governments the way they would overthrow governments in Latin America, they used color revolutions. And so I think if we take Ukraine, for example, there was the Orange Revolution. There were people who were non-violently resisting their repressive governments and so forth. And because in Ukraine, it wasn't a leftist government per se that was overthrown. The party of Viktor Yanukovych. I mean, he was very much of a center right thing, and I think because of that, it was just much more easy to manipulate the left. Because of that color revolution, because you have NGOs that are very much invested in in imperialism without the typical military means, but by non-violent means and so forth. And I think the moment the Russian army sort of intervened in Crimea, and you had the referendum, and because of the war that broke out in Donbass and Donetsk. I think many leftists were just very much confused, but I think overwhelmingly many of them just got duped into the Western imperial project because of the use of NGOs and the fact that this was a color revolution, not the West intervening out and outs with the military. I think that's probably the best way. That's probably the best example. That's probably the best way to explain why so many leftists are still reluctant to condemn what's going on in Ukraine as an out and out the fault of Western imperialism and so forth. And because Putin is not, because Putin is not a leftist, because because there are a lot of social conservatives and fiscal conservatives that support him, many Western leftists then think, well, I can't support this guy. And even though I do condemn the actions of my government, if I have to choose between Western capitalists and Russian capitalists and Russian-backed capitalists, I'm just going to go and support, the Western capitalists because that's lesser evilism. if that makes any sense.
I will say some. Firstly, I need to say that my wife sent me a message that we need to finish soon,
No problem.
because we will always after conversation I watch the Netflix series.
No problem.
Now I am watching The Dark. I don't know. Do you know this or not? It's
The Dark.
Dark, German series, very crazy.
Oh, you'll have to send me that. I would be very interested to watch that, especially if my
Yes,
based in Berlin.
it's in Netflix. Okay, I would like comment things about Bolivia because you say something that and this party which I said that Boyan he voted for the Razan party. As I said, this is the one of the most Russophobic party which existed in Poland. For example, they were very, very active to support the putsch in Belarus 2 years ago.
Yeah,
So and they were active in Poland, in Polish parliament, in front of the Belarusian embassy, but also some guys connected with this party were in Belarus. But the big surprise was that this the guy named Maciej Konieczny. He is I can second guy, the most important is this party. He he went to Bolivia in the time of the election, like an observator of this election, and I heard the interview with him about Bolivia, and it was very good. And he said, yes, I saw this election. There was a coup in Bolivia, but now the Socialist Party won this election. There are thousands of people with red flags. And the American imperialism in Bolivia financed the coup, the putsch, all this stuff. So what is this? What is in this brain of this guy that in Bolivia he can good understand and in Poland not. But there is the last question from chat for you, and after this we will finish. What is your view on the solidarity movement in the of the 1980s?
great question, and I'll respond to the other thing that you're saying. Yeah, I think. Look, I think on the left, especially the Western European left, but also the Eastern European left, which is heavily influenced by, Western European leftists, pseudo leftists, and whatnot. I think it's this. I think so many of them are influenced by NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so forth. And even if they may be very dismissive of American propaganda, they'll read their Noam Chomsky's that says that corporate media in the U.S. is the root of all evil. So they'll be very much skeptical of whatever propaganda, whatever coverage the U.S. is giving on on any world affairs. But who's based in France, and those who read German news, and those who read whatever Western European news outlets, whether it's corporate media or state media, I think there's less skepticism to when those heads of states say that we need to be weary of China, or we need to stand up to fascist Russians and stuff like that. And I think because of NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and because of other outlets, like Vice and or other, these sort of left-leaning outlets which tend to recycle all that propaganda, I think that's one reason why many leftists, when it comes to Bolivia, or when it comes to Venezuela or Nicaragua, they'll push back. They'll push back against the propaganda, and they'll show solidarity to the left movements there. But when it comes to Eastern European affairs, it's Russia is a rival imperialist, and the Soviet Union was were rival imperialists to the U.S., and we can't align with any of them. And even though we hate Western imperialism, we still do think that the West is the best, and therefore we will align with the capitalists because we feel that they're a lesser evil than the Tsarist Russia or a communist Russia, or yours truly, a Putin's Russia, and so forth like that. And a lot of investment goes into co-opting the left. The European Union, I'm not entirely anti-EU, but the EU has co-opted a lot of the left movement there, where even if you have legitimate criticisms to make about the European Union, people just dismiss you as being ignorant, as being a right-winger and whatnot. And so that's one I think that's one reason why we have a very weak peace movement and the left movement in Europe. And my view on what is your view on my view on the solidarity movement of the 1980s. I think solidarity was a movement which had legitimate grievances and wanted to address legitimate grievances of the Polish people. I think the way that the Polish authorities dealt with them was was quite brutal. But I find solidarity went from being a movement that wanted to reform the communist system in Poland to an out-and-out counter-revolution capitalist union stuff. And from the research I've done on solidarity was the National Endowment of Democracy, USAID, which were CIA front groups, I think penetrated the solidarity movement, and it went from being a leftist reformist movement into a capitalist union party. And I think when we study Eastern European affairs, that is where we should be studying on why color revolutions happen and why we continue to be so duped when an Arab Spring comes about and then later dissolves into a vicious imperial game, and why Ukraine dissolved into the tragedy it has become. I think we need to be studying what happened with the counter revolutions and movements like solidarity in Eastern Europe, because I think when we study those, it'll make every other question we have as to how we build a left movement and how we deal with propaganda and whatnot, it'll make that all the more easier. I hope I answered the question.
I only want to inform all the public that there is a book of the Professor Bruno Drwęski, which I invite in this channel very, very often. So he wrote book about the Solidarność, and also in this channel, one of the first lecture of the Bruno was about Solidarność. We spoke, and there was a lot of discussion about all the history of the socialist Poland, and one of these episodes is about Solidarność. So, so I recommend this.
Fantastic.
Okay, so comrade Yuri, thank you for conversation. It was very good time to speak with you. I hope that we will speak again one time.
Likewise, it was an honor to be here. I was very happy to get the invitation and keep doing the great work you're doing. And I'm sorry if I, kind of went all over the place sometimes in my answers.
No, it was very, very good, and I am not a guy which is very, how to say, speeding time that 20 minutes we need to finish, 40 minutes we need to finish. No, if not why my wife, which are waiting for me, I can rest with you encore 1 hour or two. But we need to finish. So one more time, thank you very much, and see you.
Thank you very much. Peace.